I honestly never thought I'd be the guy posting on a relationship advice forum. For most of our 7-year marriage, I would have described my wife as difficult, stubborn, and sometimes exhausting but never unfaithful. Now, I'm not sure I ever really knew her at all. I'm 34. My wife, Melissa, is 32. We don't have kids, but we have a house, 2 dogs, a mountain of shared memories, and what I thought was a pretty normal life. The problems started about 6 months ago. At first it was little things. She became weirdly protective of her phone. She used to leave it on the kitchen counter all the time. Suddenly it was glued to her hand like it contained nuclear launch codes. If she went to shower, the phone came with her. If she walked the dogs, the phone came with her. If she went to get the mail, somehow the phone needed to accompany her there too. Whenever a notification appeared, she'd flip the screen over so fast it looked like a reflex. When I asked about it, she'd laugh. "God, you're paranoid." That became one of her favorite phrases. You're paranoid. You're overthinking. You're imagining things. You're being insecure. At first I believed her. Then she started staying late at work. Then later. Then even later. There was always a reason. A coworker needed help. A project deadline. An emergency meeting. A client dinner. The excuses changed every week. The pattern didn't. One Friday she came home after midnight. I remember standing in the kitchen while she kicked off her shoes. "You didn't answer your phone for 5 hours. She rolled her eyes immediately. I was busy. 5 hours? Yes, Daniel. Adults work. The way she said it made me feel stupid for asking. I apologized. Looking back, that's the part that makes me angry. Not that she lied, that I apologized for noticing. Things got stranger after that. She started criticizing everything. The way I dressed, the way I loaded the dishwasher, the movies I watched, the food I cooked. It felt like she was looking for reasons to be annoyed with me. One night she randomly asked if I'd ever considered selling the house. The question came completely out of nowhere. I asked why. She shrugged. No reason. Then she changed the subject. At the time I thought it was weird. Now I realize it was the first clue. The second clue came from someone I never expected. Her father. Frank and I always got along. In fact, sometimes I think he liked me more than his own daughter. He was blunt, old school, and impossible to intimidate. One Sunday afternoon he called me. Not Melissa. Meh. His voice sounded strange, almost nervous. "Daniel," he said. You married? No. There was a long silence. Then he said something that would eventually blow up my entire life. "I think we need to talk about Melissa." My stomach dropped immediately. I didn't know why. I just knew. Sometimes your brain figures out the truth before your heart catches up. And for the first time in months, I felt genuinely afraid. I had no idea that within 48 hours I'd discover a secret that would lead to police showing up at my house, my wife disappearing for an entire night, and one of the most unbelievable betrayals I've ever heard of. But that's exactly what happened. When Frank asked me to meet him, I assumed it was some kind of family issue. Maybe Melissa had complained about me. Maybe there was a health problem. Maybe he needed help with something. Cheating wasn't even on my radar yet. I drove to his house after work the next day. The moment he opened the door, I knew something was wrong. Frank looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like he'd spent days arguing with himself. We sat at his kitchen table. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, he sighed. "Before I say anything, I need you to understand something." I nodded. "You're family to me." That caught me off guard. Frank wasn't a sentimental guy. He was the kind of man who showed affection by fixing your broken fence without mentioning it. "You know that, right?" he asked. "Yeah." Another pause. Then he rubbed his face. "I think Melissa is lying to you." My chest tightened immediately. I remember forcing out a laugh. "Lying about what?" Frank looked away. "That's the problem. I don't know." The conversation that followed felt surreal. Apparently Melissa had been acting strange around him too. Canceling family visits. Avoiding questions. Showing up unexpectedly at places she supposedly wasn't supposed to be. A few weeks earlier, she'd told me she was attending a 3-day work conference. Frank accidentally ran into her at a restaurant 40 miles away. Not at a conference. Not with coworkers. Just sitting at a table with some man. When she noticed him, she practically jumped out of her chair. According to Frank, she'd immediately started talking over him before he could even ask questions. "Oh my God, Dad. This is Eric from work." Then she'd launched into a 10-minute explanation nobody had requested. Frank said that was what bothered him. People who tell the truth answer questions. People who lie answer questions nobody asked. At the time, he decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. But then things kept happening. He'd call her during work hours. No answer. Hours later, she'd claimed she was in meetings. Meanwhile, he'd seen photos online from restaurants or shopping centers posted by people who happened to tag her. Every explanation felt forced. Every story had holes. I don't have proof she's cheating, Frank said. But something is wrong. I sat there staring at the table. Part of me wanted to defend her. Part of me already knew he was right. Then he dropped another bomb. I hired a private investigator. I almost choked. You what? I said I hired a private investigator. You hired someone to investigate your own daughter? Frank looked disgusted. Don't make me sound crazy. You literally hired a private investigator because she keeps lying. The room fell silent. Then he reached into a folder. My heart started pounding. Slowly, he slid a photograph across the table. I looked down. Melissa, walking through a parking lot, holding hands with a man I had never seen before. The timestamp showed a Wednesday. The same Wednesday she'd told me she was stuck in meetings until 10 p.m. For a few seconds my brain refused to process it. I just stared. Then I looked again. Same hair, same clothes, same smile. My wife, holding another man's hand. The strangest part? I didn't feel anger. Not yet. Just disbelief. Like I was looking at a photoshopped image. Like reality had somehow become optional. Frank handed me another photograph. Then another. Then another. Lunch dates. Restaurants. Hotels. A park. More hand-holding. More smiles. More lies. The investigator had been following her for almost 3 weeks. And according to the report, the relationship looked serious. Not a one-time mistake. Not a drunken decision. A full-blown affair. I sat there for what felt like an hour. Eventually, I asked the question, does she know you hired someone? Frank shook his head. No. Does anybody else know? No. I nodded slowly. Then my phone buzzed. Melissa. A text message. 3 words. Working late again. The timestamp on the investigator's latest photo was from 20 minutes earlier. In the picture, she was entering a downtown hotel with the same man. I stared at the message, then at the photo, then back at the message. Working late again. For the first time, I knew with absolute certainty that my wife was lying. But neither Frank nor I realized something even worse was happening behind the affair. Because later that night, while reviewing the investigator's report, we found a name that connected Melissa's secret relationship to a financial disaster that was about to hit me like a freight train. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photographs. Melissa laughing, Melissa smiling, Melissa holding another man's hand. The worst part wasn't even the cheating. It was realizing how many times she'd looked me in the eye and lied without hesitation. I kept replaying conversations from the past 6 months. Every excuse, every late night, every business trip, every accusation that I was paranoid. By 3 in the morning, I was sitting in my living room staring at the investigator's report while Melissa slept upstairs, or at least pretended to sleep. At that point, I wasn't sure about anything. The report itself was surprisingly detailed. Dates, locations, photos, vehicle information, witness notes. The investigator had done a thorough job. Frank and I were reviewing everything page by page over the phone when something caught my attention. A name, Eric Lawson, the man she'd been seeing. At first it meant nothing, just another guy, another homewrecker. Then I turned a page, and my stomach dropped. The investigator had included background information, occupation, business affiliations, recent property transactions, known associates. One line stood out, Eric Lawson, real estate consultant. I immediately remembered the conversation about selling our house, the random question, the sudden interest, the weird comments she'd been making for weeks. A bad feeling settled in my chest, the kind of feeling that arrives before disaster. The next morning, I called my bank during lunch. What happened next nearly gave me a heart attack. The representative asked me a routine security question. Then she casually mentioned a recent inquiry regarding our mortgage. I froze. What inquiry? There was a pause. Sir, there was a request submitted regarding refinancing options. I almost dropped my phone. But the representative sounded confused. You weren't aware? No. Another pause. Then she explained. Several weeks earlier, someone had requested information about modifying our mortgage. Not final approval, not completed paperwork, but preliminary discussions had already taken place, using information that should only have been available to one of the homeowners. I felt physically sick. The rest of the workday was a blur. I couldn't focus, couldn't think, couldn't even sit still. Every terrible possibility started running through my head. Was she planning to leave? Was she trying to take the house? Was she preparing some kind of financial exit strategy? Or was I overreacting? I wanted answers. Unfortunately, I got them much sooner than expected. That evening I came home early. Melissa wasn't there. Her car wasn't there either. No surprise. She'd texted me that morning saying she had another late meeting. I almost laughed when I read it. Instead, I started looking through financial documents. Nothing illegal, nothing sneaky, Everything was jointly owned. Everything was mine too. I simply wanted to understand what was happening. And then I found something. A folder I had never seen before, hidden inside a drawer in her home office. Inside were printed emails, property listings, mortgage estimates, financial calculations, pages and pages of notes. Almost all of them involved our house, our savings, our assets, and Eric's name appeared repeatedly. I was halfway through reading them when I heard the front door open. Melissa was home. I barely had time to close the folder. She walked into the office. The second she saw me sitting there, her expression changed. Just for a moment, a fraction of a second, but I saw it. Panic, then it vanished, replaced by irritation. What are you doing in here? Not hello, not how was your day? Immediately defensive. I stood up. What are these documents? Her eyes moved to the folder, then back to me, and suddenly she smiled, a fake smile, the kind that never reaches the eyes. Oh, those? Just 2 words. But I knew she was improvising. They're nothing. Nothing. Hundreds of pages discussing our finances. Nothing. I asked why Eric's name was all over them. For the first time, genuine fear appeared on her face. Only for a second. Then came another lie. He helps people with investments. I stared at her. You told me he was a co-worker. Silence. Then another lie. Yes, you just said he helps people with investments. Silence again. She was cornered and she knew it. But instead of backing down, she became aggressive. That was Melissa's specialty. When caught, attacked. Why are you going through my stuff? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't denying anything. She wasn't explaining anything. She was angry at me. The conversation escalated fast. Voices got louder. Accusations started flying. Then suddenly her phone rang. I saw the screen light up. Eric. For one brief moment, neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The room became completely silent. And then, incredibly, she answered the call, right in front of me. What happened during that phone call was the moment my marriage truly exploded. To this day, I still can't believe she answered the phone. Not because it was Eric, because she answered it while we were actively arguing about Eric. Any normal person would have declined the call. Any innocent person would have handed me the phone. Melissa didn't either. She looked directly at me and pressed accept. Her voice instantly changed. Softer, friendlier, the voice she hadn't used with me in months. I felt something break inside me. Not dramatically, not like in movies. Just a quiet realization that the woman standing in front of me wasn't the person I thought she was. I watched her listen for a few seconds. Then she glanced at me and smiled. Actually smiled. Yeah, I'll call you back. She hung up. The room stayed silent. I was waiting for an explanation. Instead, she folded her arms. I honestly laughed. Not because anything was funny, because my brain didn't know how else to react. Yeah, what do you mean what? She rolled her eyes. He called. I stared at her. That's your explanation? Daniel, this is ridiculous. There it was again. That word. Ridiculous. Everything was ridiculous. My questions were ridiculous. My concerns were ridiculous. The evidence was ridiculous. Apparently, reality itself was ridiculous. I pulled out my phone, opened one of the investigator's photos, and showed it to her. For the first time, she lost control. Not much, just enough. Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. A normal person might have confessed. Melissa chose a different strategy. She lied immediately. That's not what it looks like. Classic. I almost expected it. You're holding his hand. We were walking. I blinked. We were walking. People walk while holding hands. Sometimes, I remember staring at her and thinking that she couldn't possibly believe her own excuses. Then came the next lie. We're just friends. Though. Why? Though. Why? Though. Why? The pattern continued. Every piece of evidence triggered a new explanation. Lunch dates, work meetings, hotel visits, business conferences, weekend trips, networking events, hand-holding, comforting a friend. At one point, she actually claimed the investigator had manipulated the photographs. That was when I stopped arguing. There was no point. You can't reason with someone who treats facts as optional. Then I mentioned Frank. That changed everything. What about your father? The reaction was immediate. She froze. What about him? He knows? Her face drained of color. What did you tell him? Interesting choice of words. Not what does he know? Not what are you talking about? She already knew exactly what I meant. I told her about the investigator, the photos, the report, everything. The look she gave me was pure rage, not embarrassment, not guilt. Ready? At her father. You had dad spying on me? The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed again. She was the one having an affair, yet somehow she was the victim. For the next 10 minutes she screamed about betrayal, privacy, trust, manipulation. anything except the affair itself. Eventually, I got tired of listening. I asked a simple question. One question. Do you love him? The room went silent. For the first time all evening, she didn't have an answer ready. No excuses, no lies, no deflection, nothing. That silence hurt more than every photograph combined, because I finally had my answer. Then something completely unexpected happened. The doorbell rang, 9:30 at night. Neither of us was expecting anyone. Melissa looked confused. I looked confused. The bell rang again. Then somebody started knocking. Hard. Very hard. Melissa suddenly looked nervous. Really nervous. I opened the door and found two police officers standing on my porch. My first thought was that something terrible had happened. An accident, a family emergency, something like that. Instead, one of the officers asked a question that made absolutely no sense. Does Eric Lawson live here? I just stared at him. But the officer repeated the question. Behind me, Melissa looked like she'd seen a ghost. And that was the exact moment I realized Eric wasn't just her affair partner. He was hiding something too. Something serious enough that the police were actively looking for him. The police officers repeated the question. Does Eric Lawson live here? For a second, nobody spoke. I looked at them. They looked at me. Then I slowly turned toward Melissa. She looked terrified. Not nervous, not embarrassed. Terrified. That was the first thing that really caught my attention. Because up until then, she'd been angry, defensive, aggressive. Suddenly all of that was gone. The officers noticed it too. One of them glanced at her. Ma'am, do you know Mr. Lawson? Melissa answered far too quickly. No, I nearly laughed. After everything I'd just discovered, she was still lying. Even now, even with police standing in the doorway. No, I said. She shot me a murderous look. The officer's eyes moved between us. Clearly, he could tell something strange was happening. We have reason to believe Mr. Lawson may have been using this address in connection with several financial documents. My stomach dropped. What kind of financial documents? The officer hesitated. We can't discuss an ongoing investigation. That wasn't exactly comforting. The conversation lasted only a few minutes. Eventually, they left a business card and asked us to contact them if we heard from Eric. Then they left. The second the patrol car disappeared down the street, I turned toward Melissa. What the hell is going on? She didn't answer. What did he do? No answer. Melissa, still nothing. Then, suddenly, she grabbed her purse. I'm leaving. I blinked. What? I'm leaving. Leaving where? She headed toward the front door. I followed. Are you serious right now? She ignored me. I grabbed my keys. Melissa. She spun around. For a brief moment, I thought she was finally going to tell the truth. Instead, she snapped. You don't understand anything. Then she walked out. The front door slammed. And just like that, she was gone. I stood there in stunned silence. The entire confrontation had lasted less than an hour. My marriage was collapsing. Police had shown up looking for her boyfriend, and now she had disappeared. I called Frank immediately. His reaction was exactly what you'd expect. What do you mean she left? She got in her car and drove away. Where? I don't know. A long pause. Then he sighed. She's going to him. Deep down, I knew he was right. Around midnight, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A male voice spoke. Then, oh, who is this? Another pause. Then my blood turned cold. It's Eric. For a second, I couldn't even process what I was hearing. The man sleeping with my wife was calling me. Directly. At midnight. I nearly hung up. Then he said something strange. You need to listen to me. I stayed silent. Melissa's in trouble. I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprised even me. Melissa's in trouble? Ness? You mean the woman who's been lying to me for months? This isn't about that. Then what is it about? There was heavy breathing on the line. He sounded scared. Genuinely scared. Then he said 4 words that completely changed the situation. She is being used. I froze. What? I don't have much time. Every alarm bell in my head started ringing. This sounded insane. Like something from a bad movie. But his voice didn't sound fake. It sounded desperate. Then he dropped another bomb. The money wasn't my idea. What money? Silence. Then, ask her cousin Ryan. What? The call ended. I stared at the phone. Ryan. Her cousin Ryan. A guy I barely thought about. A guy who had attended family barbecues, birthday parties, Christmas dinners. A guy I'd known for years. I immediately called Eric back. No answer. Adam. No answer. Adam. Straight to voicemail. Well, I called Frank. Woke him up. Told him everything. Neither of us understood what was happening. But one thing was becoming clear. The affair wasn't the whole story. Not even close. The next morning we decided to confront Ryan. Neither of us expected that we'd find him loading suitcases into the back of his truck. or that he'd take one look at us and try to drive away. The next morning, Frank picked me up before sunrise. Neither of us had slept. Every new piece of information somehow made less sense than the one before it. My wife was cheating. Her affair partner was being investigated. Police were looking for him. He claimed Melissa was being used. Then he named Ryan. Nothing fit together, yet somehow it all felt connected. We drove straight to Ryan's house. The plan was simple. Asked questions, get answers. How's it? Instead, the second we turned onto his street, everything went sideways. Ryan was outside, loading suitcases into the back of his truck. Not one suitcase, not two, six, along with several cardboard boxes. Frank immediately muttered a curse. Ryan noticed our car. His reaction was instant. Panic, pure panic. He practically threw a suitcase into the truck bed, then climbed into the driver's seat. He's running, I said. I can see that. The truck started. Frank slammed on the accelerator. What followed was probably the strangest moment of my entire life. I found myself chasing my cheating wife's cousin through suburban streets at 8 in the morning while her father yelled directions from the passenger seat. Ryan blew through a stop sign. Frank followed. Ryan turned sharply. Frank followed again. Finally, Ryan pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store and stopped. We parked behind him. The second he stepped out, Frank was already walking toward him. Furious. What the hell are you doing? Ryan looked trapped, like an animal that had run out of exits. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then Frank asked the question, what did you do? Ryan's shoulders slumped, and just like that, I knew. Whatever was happening, he was involved. Deeply involved. He looked at me, then at Frank, then back at me. I didn't think it would get this bad. That's never a reassuring sentence. Ever. What wouldn't get this bad? I asked. Ryan rubbed his face. For a moment he looked genuinely miserable. Then he started talking. The story came out in pieces. Months earlier, he'd gotten involved in a property investment scheme. At first it sounded legitimate. Real estate deals, quick profits, short-term investments, the usual promises. Eric had introduced him to several people. One deal became two became five. Then the money started disappearing. Thousands, then tens of thousands, then more. By the time Ryan realized something was wrong, he was already trapped. And according to him, Melissa got involved shortly afterward. Not because she was having an affair yet, because Ryan asked for help. That part surprised me. For the first time in this entire mess, I heard something that almost sounded believable. Ryan claimed Melissa initially wanted to help him recover the money. She started meeting Eric, investigating the situation, trying to understand what happened. Then things changed. Changed how? I asked. Ryan looked away. They got involved. There it was, the affair. Even now, hearing it spoken aloud felt like a punch to the chest. Ryan nodded slowly. At first she was trying to help. Then she stopped caring about helping. The implication was obvious. Melissa had crossed a line, and once she crossed it, she never came back. But Ryan wasn't finished. The real shock came next. She wasn't planning to leave you. I laughed bitterly. That's supposed to make me feel better? Though, he swallowed hard. She was planning to take money from the house. Frank cursed loudly. Ryan nodded. Apparently several conversations had taken place about refinancing, selling, borrowing against equity, moving funds. None of it had actually happened yet, but discussions were underway. Enough discussions that my blood pressure nearly exploded listening to them. Then I asked the question that had been bothering me since Eric's phone call. What did he mean when he said Melissa was being used? Ryan's face changed. The confidence vanished. Fear replaced it. Real fear. The kind you can't fake. Because according to Ryan, Eric wasn't the one running the scheme. Eric was working for someone else. Someone much bigger. Someone dangerous. And 2 days earlier, a large amount of money had disappeared. Money that didn't belong to any of them. Money that somebody wanted back. Suddenly Eric wasn't answering calls. People were disappearing. Police were asking questions. And Melissa had spent the previous night desperately trying to find him. I felt sick. This entire thing had escalated far beyond an affair. Then Ryan delivered the worst news yet. There's something else. I was getting tired of hearing those words. What now? He looked directly at me. The people looking for Eric think Melissa has access to some of the money. My stomach dropped. Does she? I don't know. That answer might have been true. Or another lie. At that point, who could tell? Then my phone buzzed. A text message. From Melissa. The first message she'd sent since leaving. Just 6 words. I need help. Don't call police. A second message arrived immediately afterward, and when I read it, every hair on my arm stood up, because attached to the text was a photograph. Melissa was sitting in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, and standing behind her was a man holding a handgun. For several seconds, nobody said a word. I just stared at the photo. Melissa sat in a metal chair. Her makeup was smeared. Her hair looked messy. She wasn't smiling, wasn't posing, wasn't pretending. She looked terrified. Behind her stood a man I had never seen before. And yes, he was holding a handgun. At first I assumed the image had to be fake. Some kind of manipulation. A joke. A setup. Anything. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message. Please, just help me. That's when reality hit. My wife, the same woman who had lied to me for months, cheated on me, and apparently discussed taking money from our house, was now begging me for help. I wish I could say I immediately knew what to do. I didn't. Part of me wanted to ignore her. Part of me wanted to tell the police everything. Part of me wanted to throw my phone into the nearest river and walk away from all of it. Instead, I showed the messages to Frank and Ryan. Ryan went pale. Frank looked furious. Not at me, at the situation. Call the police, he said. Immediately, Ryan shook his head. If those guys are who I think they are, that could get her hurt. Frank rounded on him. And your solution is what? Do nothing? The argument exploded. Within seconds they were shouting at each other in the middle of the grocery store parking lot. People were staring. Cars were slowing down. I barely noticed. My attention stayed on the photo. Something about it bothered me. Something I couldn't explain. Then I zoomed in and saw it. A reflection. Tiny, barely visible. In a dirty metal cabinet behind Melissa. A reflection of the person taking the photo. I froze, then zoomed in further. The image became grainy, blurry, but still recognizable. My heart nearly stopped. The person taking the photo wasn't the man with the gun. It was Eric. I looked again. Same build, same face, same jacket from the investigators' photos. Eric had taken the picture. What? The question kept spinning through my head. Then my phone rang. Melissa. I answered immediately. Where are you? Her voice was shaking. Daniel. For the first time in months, there was no attitude, no sarcasm, no insults, just fear. Where are you? I repeated. I can't tell you. I nearly lost my mind. What do you mean you can't tell me? They'll hear. Oh, silence. Then I messed up. No kidding. I know. You don't understand. I almost laughed. At this point I was fairly certain nobody understood anything. Then she said something that caught me completely off guard. I'm sorry. The words sounded foreign coming from her, like hearing a wolf bark. I honestly couldn't remember the last time she'd apologized for anything. Then she started crying. Not fake crying, not dramatic crying, real crying. The kind where someone struggles to breathe between words. I didn't think this would happen. I stayed silent. What happened? More crying. Then, Eric lied to me too. That didn't surprise me. The man was being investigated by police. Honesty clearly wasn't his strongest quality. But what she said next did surprise me. He told me he loved me. I closed my eyes. Even after everything, those words hurt. Not because I wanted her back. Because they made the affair real in a way photographs never could. My wife hadn't just cheated. She'd fallen in love with someone else. Or thought she had. Then came another voice. A male voice. Close to the phone. Time's up. Melissa gasped. Wait, the call ended. Just like that. Oh, I tried calling back. Nothing. Nothing. Straight to voicemail. Frank looked at me. What did she say? I told him. Every word. When I finished, Ryan looked terrified. Genuinely terrified. Then he whispered something that made my blood run cold. They found her before Eric did. Nobody understood what he meant. So I asked, who found her? Ryan swallowed and quietly gave us a name none of us had heard before. The name of the man who had allegedly organized the entire investment scheme. The man police had been trying to identify for months. The man Eric had apparently stolen from. And according to Ryan, if that man really had Melissa, the affair was no longer the biggest problem, because people who crossed him had a habit of disappearing permanently. The man's name was Victor Hale. At least, that's the name Ryan gave us. Whether it was his real name or not, nobody seemed to know. According to Ryan, Victor operated through layers of middlemen, shell companies, and fake business ventures. Most people never met him directly. Eric had, which apparently was part of the problem. The more Ryan talked, the worse things sounded. What started as shady investments had eventually turned into outright fraud. Money moved through accounts. Investors got promises. Properties appeared and disappeared on paper. Nobody asked too many questions as long as profits kept flowing. Then one day the money stopped flowing. And shortly after that, people started panicking. How much money are we talking about? I asked. Ryan looked embarrassed. Then he gave a number. Even now, I remember the exact feeling that hit me. Numbness. The amount was enormous. Far beyond anything I'd imagined. Far beyond something Melissa could ever repay. far beyond something Eric could repay. Frank sat down heavily on a nearby bench. For the first time all morning, he looked old. Really old. Then my phone vibrated again. Another message. Melissa. Only 3 words this time. He found Eric. That's all. No explanation. No details. Nothing else. I immediately called. No answer. Nothing. Then a second message arrived. A fellow. This time my stomach truly dropped. Eric was in the picture. Alive. But barely. He looked injured. One eye swollen shut. A lot on his face. His hands tied behind a chair. Whoever had taken the photo wanted a message delivered. And they delivered it. Frank stared at the image. Then quietly said something I'll never forget. She's in way over her head. For once, nobody disagreed. An hour later everything changed again. Because the police called me, not Melissa, not Ryan. The detective from the previous night asked if I could come to the station. Immediately, his tone left little room for debate. I drove there with Frank. The entire way I expected bad news. Maybe they'd found Eric. Maybe they'd found Melissa. Maybe someone was dead. At this point nothing seemed impossible. Instead, the detective showed us something unexpected. Security footage. Brainy. Silence. Recorded 2 nights earlier. The detective pointed at the screen. Do you recognize these people? I looked carefully. Then froze. Melissa. Eric. And a third person. A man wearing a dark jacket. The footage showed them entering a storage facility. A few minutes later the third man left alone. Melissa and Eric never appeared again. The detective paused the video, then zoomed in. The image sharpened slightly. My heart skipped a beat. I knew the third man. Not well, but I knew him. I'd seen him before. Family gatherings, birthday parties, holiday dinners. Frank suddenly stood up. His face had gone completely pale. No? The detective looked at him. You recognize him? Frank stared at the screen, then slowly nodded. The room felt colder. What is it? I asked. Frank looked sick. Actually sick. Then he said the last thing I expected to hear. That's Melissa's brother. For several seconds nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I thought I had misheard him. Her brother? Frank nodded. My mind immediately rejected it. Her brother, Kevin, lived 3 states away. We barely saw him. He visited once or twice a year. Quiet guy. Kept to himself. Nothing remarkable. Nothing suspicious. At least that's what I thought. The detective folded his arms. We've been trying to locate him since yesterday. A horrible feeling settled in my chest. Because suddenly dozens of strange events from the past years started making sense. Kevin's unexpected visits, random disappearances, conversations that ended when I entered the room, Melissa taking phone calls in private. The detective continued. Kevin's name has appeared in multiple financial records connected to our investigation. Frank looked devastated. One child involved would have been bad enough. Now both of them were connected. Then the detective delivered another shock. Kevin's apartment had been searched that morning. It was empty. Completely empty. Furniture gone. Computers gone. Documents gone. Kevin had vanished. And according to the detective, he might have taken something extremely important with him. Something Victor Hale desperately wanted back. The detective slid a photograph across the table. A black flash drive. Small, ordinary, easy to miss. Apparently several people had already been threatened over it. Maybe worse. Then he looked directly at me. Mr. Carter, we have reason to believe your wife may know where this drive is. I stared at him. The detective stared back. Then my phone started ringing. Everyone in the room looked down. Unknown number. Again, I answered. For a few seconds there was only static. Then a voice spoke. A familiar voice. Eric, wait, breathing hard. Barely audible. And the first thing he said was, Kevin set us up. Then a loud crashing sound came through the phone. A shout. A scream. The line went dead. And seconds later, a text message arrived from an untraceable number. It contained only an address and one sentence. Come alone if you want your wife alive. The address led to an abandoned industrial district on the edge of the city. The kind of place nobody visits unless they have a very specific reason. Half the buildings were boarded up. The other half looked one strong wind away from collapsing. The detective immediately told me not to go. Frank told me not to go. Even Ryan told me not to go. Which was ironic, considering most of this mess seemed connected to him in the first place. But despite everything, one fact remained. Melissa might be there. And whether I hated her, loved her, or felt nothing at all, I wasn't going to ignore a message that said she might be killed. The police came up with a plan. Officially, I would go alone. Unofficially, I wouldn't actually be alone. They'd keep their distance. Watch the area. Wait for an opportunity. It sounded reasonable. It also sounded like the sort of plan that falls apart immediately in movies. Unfortunately, reality wasn't much better. By sunset I was driving toward the address. My hands were shaking, not from fear, at least not entirely. I was exhausted, mentally, emotionally, physically. 3 days earlier, I thought my biggest problem was a failing marriage. Now I was driving into the middle of what sounded like a criminal conspiracy. Life comes at you fast. The building was an old warehouse. Mezzo, silent. No lights visible from outside. I parked, got out, waited, nothing. For nearly 2 minutes I stood there wondering if the entire thing was a trap. Then the side door opened. A man stepped out. Not the guy from the photos. Not Victor. Not Eric. Someone else. He motioned for me to enter. I considered turning around. Instead I followed him. The inside smelled like dust and rust. The building was mostly empty. Just concrete floors and old equipment. Then I saw Melissa. She wasn't tied up. That surprised me. She was sitting in a chair near the center of the room, looking exhausted. The second she saw me, she burst into tears. Honestly, if someone had told me a week earlier that Melissa would spend multiple days crying, I would have assumed they were talking about a different woman. The man who escorted me disappeared into another room, leaving us alone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Melissa stood up. I'm sorry. There it was again. That apology. Too late. Months too late. Maybe years too late. I looked at her. Really looked at her. And suddenly something strange happened. The anger I'd been carrying started fading. Not because she'd earned forgiveness. Not because the affair hurt less. Because I was tired. Completely tired. You lied to me. She nodded, tears running down her face. I know. You cheated on me. Another nod. I know. You planned things behind my back. I know. Every answer was the same. No excuses. No arguments. No manipulation. It would have been easier if she'd kept lying. Instead, she looked broken. And somehow that was worse. Then she told me the truth. Or at least what sounded like the truth. According to her, Eric had initially approached her through Ryan. The investment story was real. The financial discussions were real. The affair was real. Everything was real. But she claimed she never intended for things to reach this point. I almost laughed. Nobody ever intends to drive off a cliff. That doesn't stop them from accelerating toward it. Then she told me about Kevin. Apparently Kevin had been involved much longer than anyone realized. Years, not months. Yes, he'd gained access to financial records, investor information, and transaction histories. Eventually, he copied everything onto a flash drive. Insurance, leverage, protection, whatever you wanted to call it. Then people started looking for it, including Victor, including Eric, including apparently half the people involved in the scheme. And according to Melissa, Kevin had disappeared after stealing additional money. A lot of additional money. I rubbed my face. The entire story sounded insane. Then I asked the obvious question, why am I here? Melissa looked away. That hesitation scared me, because it meant she knew something I didn't. Then footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Several people entered from a side room. One of them immediately caught my attention. A tall man, expensive suit, calm expression, no visible emotion. Everyone else seemed nervous around him. That told me all I needed to know. Victor. Nobody introduced him. Nobody needed to. He walked toward us slowly, then stopped, and smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, just enough to make me uncomfortable. Then he said something that completely blindsided me. Mr. Harder. I stared at him. He nodded politely. Your wife has been very concerned about you. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Then Victor continued, and that's unfortunate. A cold feeling settled into my chest, because the way he said it sounded less like sympathy, and more like a problem. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a black flash drive, and placed it on a nearby table. The exact flash drive police had shown me earlier. The one everyone was searching for. The one Kevin supposedly stole. Victor looked directly at me, then at Melissa, and finally delivered the biggest twist yet. Kevin didn't steal this. The warehouse fell silent. Victor smiled again. This belonged to your wife all along. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought Victor was lying. That would have made sense. Everyone else had been lying. Why stop now? I looked at Melissa. She looked horrified. Not angry, not defensive. Horrified. That's not true, she said immediately. Victor smiled. That's exactly what I expected. Melissa took a step forward. I never had that drive. Victor raised an eyebrow. No, interesting. He tapped the flash drive with one finger, then looked at me. Mr. Carter, would you like to hear something fascinating? Not particularly, but it didn't seem like I had a choice. Victor continued. Most people think secrets are hidden because they're valuable. Nobody spoke. Actually, secrets are usually hidden because they're embarrassing. He gestured toward Melissa. Your wife has been protecting one for a very long time. Melissa looked like she wanted to disappear. The room felt tense. dangerously tense. Then Victor nodded toward one of his men. The man handed him a folder, a familiar folder. My stomach dropped. I recognized it immediately. The folder from Melissa's home office. The one containing financial documents, property notes, mortgage information, everything. Victor opened it, then pulled out a single sheet of paper and handed it to me. I looked down. At first I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then I saw the signature. Melissa's signature, dated almost 4 years earlier, long before the affair, long before Eric, long before Ryan's investment problems, long before any of this. My confusion must have shown. Victor noticed. She never told you, did she? I looked at Melissa. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Then the truth finally came out. The real truth. The secret she'd apparently been hiding for years. Before we'd gotten married, Kevin had convinced her to invest money in one of his business ventures. Not a lot, just enough to help him get started. The venture failed, or so she believed. In reality, Kevin had used several investors' money improperly, including hers. When she discovered what happened, she helped him cover it up. Nothing major, just paperwork, a few misleading statements, a few signatures, a few lies, small decisions, the kind that feel harmless at the time, the kind that grow teeth years later. Melissa started crying again. I was trying to protect him. Victor laughed softly. Everyone says that. The worst part? I believed her. For the first time since this nightmare began, I actually believed her. Not because she was innocent, because the story fit. Kevin had always been reckless. Melissa had always protected him, even when she shouldn't, especially when she shouldn't. Victor closed the folder. Then he looked almost bored. Unfortunately, protecting him became expensive. That was where the flash drive came in. Apparently, Kevin had collected evidence against everyone involved. Transactions, names, records. Enough information to destroy careers. Enough information to send people to prison. Enough information to make a lot of dangerous people panic. And according to Victor, Kevin had hidden a copy somewhere. The problem? Nobody knew where. Not even Victor. Not even Eric. Maybe not even Kevin anymore. Then Victor revealed something nobody expected. The flash drive on the table was empty. Completely empty. A decoy. The real drive was still missing. The entire room went silent. Then someone laughed. A nervous laugh. Not me. Not Melissa. One of Victor's men. Victor slowly turned toward him. The laughter stopped immediately. The atmosphere changed. Fast? Very fast. For the first time, I realized something important. Victor wasn't in control anymore. At least not completely. People around him were nervous, suspicious, watching each other. The situation was unstable. Dangerously unstable. Then a loud noise echoed outside. It crashed. Several men immediately reached for weapons. Victor's expression darkened. Another crash followed. Closer this time. Then shouting. Lots of shouting. The warehouse exploded into chaos. People started moving in every direction. Doors slammed. Someone yelled. Someone else ran. And then I heard the 3 words nobody in that building wanted to hear. Federal agents? Duh. Everything happened at once. People scattered. Victor spun around. Several of his men bolted toward side exits. Melissa grabbed my arm. The next 30 seconds felt like a blur of noise and movement. But in the middle of that chaos, one thing stood out. One thing I'll never forget. Victor wasn't trying to escape. He was staring at Melissa and smiling, like he knew something, like he'd already won. Then he pointed toward me, looked directly at Melissa, and said, "Ask him about the safety deposit box." My brain froze. Melissa froze. Everyone froze. Because I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. And apparently neither did she. The warehouse descended into complete chaos. Agents were shouting commands. People were running. Some were surrendering. Others were trying very hard not to. In the middle of all of it, Victor's final words kept echoing in my head. Ask him about the safety deposit box. I had no idea what he meant. Neither did Melissa. At least that's what I thought. Then I looked at her and saw something strange. Confusion. Yes, but something else too. Recognition. Just a flicker. Gone almost immediately. But I saw it. Before I could ask anything, agents surrounded us and pulled us away from the center of the warehouse. The next few hours became a blur of interviews, statements, paperwork, and endless questions. Who was Victor? What did Melissa know? What did I know? Had I seen the flash drive? Had I ever met Kevin privately? Did I know where Eric was? The answer to most of those questions was some variation of no. Around 3 in the morning, Frank arrived at the federal office. The second Melissa saw him, she broke down. Completely. Not polite crying. Not dramatic crying. The kind of crying that comes from realizing you've destroyed your own life. Frank just stood there, looking at his daughter. The daughter he'd defended for years. The daughter he'd investigated. The daughter he'd tried to save from herself. Finally, he spoke. "I raised you better than this." Melissa started crying harder. Frank wasn't yelling. That somehow made it worse. Then he walked over to me, placed a hand on my shoulder, and quietly said, "I'm sorry." I don't think he was apologizing for the affair, or the lies, or the investigation. I think he was apologizing for all of it. Everything. For a moment, I actually felt bad for him. Imagine discovering both your children had become involved in something like this. I honestly don't know how he handled it. By sunrise, things became even stranger, because they found Eric. Alive, but alive. He'd been abandoned at a remote property several counties away, hospitalized, injured, terrified, and according to investigators, suddenly very willing to cooperate. Apparently, near-death experiences can be persuasive. Over the next 2 days, the entire operation started collapsing. Arrests happened, accounts were frozen, properties were seized, names started appearing everywhere. Victor's network was much larger than anyone realized. The news picked up the story. People started talking. Lawsuits followed. Then, unexpectedly, Kevin resurfaced. Not because he wanted to, because he got caught trying to leave the country. When agents searched his belongings, they found cash, documents, false identification, and absolutely no flash drive. The drive was still missing. Nobody knew where it was. Nobody could find it. The mystery just kept growing. Then, 3 days later, I got the answer. By accident. I was at home gathering documents requested by investigators. The house felt empty, quiet, strange. Melissa wasn't there. Probably never would be again. At least not as my wife. I was sorting through old paperwork when I found something I'd completely forgotten about. A small envelope, tucked inside a box of documents from years earlier. Before the marriage, before the house, before everything. The handwriting on the envelope caught my attention. Kevin's handwriting. I opened it. Inside was a single key. Just a key, attached with a note. A note dated almost 5 years earlier. I read it once, then again, then a third time, because I couldn't believe it. The note said, "If anything happens, box 417. Don't tell Melissa." My blood ran cold. Box 417. Safety deposit box. Suddenly Victor's final comment made sense. Not because I knew about the box, because Kevin apparently believed I might someday discover it. I immediately contacted investigators. A few hours later, we opened the box together. What we found inside changed everything. Not money, not gold, not jewelry. The real flash drive, along with enough evidence to destroy what remained of Victor's organization. The drive contained everything. Transactions, names, recordings, correspondence, years of information. The investigation instantly shifted into overdrive. And just like that, the mystery of the missing drive was over. But my marriage wasn't. Because later that evening, after all the discoveries, after all the arrests, after all the chaos, Melissa asked to see me one final time. Alone. And what she said during that meeting was the last thing I ever expected to hear from her. A week later, I agreed to meet Melissa. Part of me didn't want to. Part of me felt I owed it to myself. After everything we'd been through, I wanted the story to end face to face. Not through lawyers. Not through investigators. Not through court documents. Just us. One last conversation. The meeting took place in a small attorney's office. Nothing dramatic. No shouting. No tears at first. Just silence. Melissa looked different. Not physically, emotionally. The arrogance was gone. The constant defensiveness was gone. The attitude I'd spent months dealing with had vanished completely. She looked like someone who had finally run out of lies. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. "I never stopped loving you." I stared at her. Honestly, after everything, that statement almost annoyed me, because it would have been easier if she had simply stopped loving me. Then the affair would make sense. People fall out of love. People leave. People make selfish choices. It's ugly, but it's understandable. What she described was somehow worse. She claimed she convinced herself she could have both lives. Bit and Eric. Stability and excitement. True. And lies. She kept telling herself she'd end the affair. Tomorrow. Next week. Next month. After one more conversation. After one more meeting. After one more lie. Until eventually she was trapped inside a mess she'd created herself. I listened quietly. Not because I agreed. Because arguing no longer mattered. Then she told me the final truth. The one thing she'd never admitted before. The affair wasn't why I lost you. I looked at her. She wiped away tears. The affair was just proof I'd already become someone you shouldn't trust. That sentence stayed with me. Because for the first time, she wasn't minimizing anything. She wasn't blaming Eric, or Ryan, or Kevin, or me. She was accepting responsibility, far too late, but still. Then she handed me a folder. Divorce papers, already signed. I wasn't expecting that. Neither was her attorney. Apparently she'd made the decision that morning. No fighting, she said quietly. No dragging this out. I looked through the documents. Everything was straightforward. Fair. No hidden surprises. No attempts to take the house. No attempts to punish me. Just an ending. Finally, a real ending. Then she said something else. Something that genuinely caught me off guard. My dad was right. I smiled sadly. About what? About you. I didn't know what to say to that. So I said nothing. A few minutes later, she stood up. So did I. And for the first time since this nightmare began, neither of us argued. Neither of us accused. Neither of us lied. She simply nodded, turned around, and walked away. That was the last time I saw her. As for what happened afterward, Victor was eventually convicted on multiple charges. Several members of his organization cooperated with authorities. Eric testified against numerous people involved in the scheme. Ryan avoided prison but spent years dealing with financial consequences. Kevin wasn't so lucky. Frank remained in my life, which still feels strange to say. The man who helped expose his own daughter's affair became one of my closest friends. We have dinner every few weeks. Sometimes we talk about what happened. Most of the time we don't. As for me, the divorce was finalized 8 months later. It hurt a lot for a long time. There were days I was angry, days I was devastated, days I questioned everything. But eventually something unexpected happened. Life moved forward. Not quickly, not magically, just gradually, one day at a time. If there's anything I've learned from all of this, it's that betrayal rarely starts with one big decision. It starts with small compromises, tiny lies, little acts of dishonesty people convince themselves don't matter, until one day they matter more than anything. And if anyone reading this is in a situation where your instincts keep telling you something is wrong, don't ignore them forever like I did. Trust isn't about believing someone no matter what. Trust is about honesty. And once honesty disappears, everything built on top of it starts cracking. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. I lost my marriage. I lost the future I thought I was going to have. But I also learned something important. The truth eventually comes out. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And when it does, the people who spent their lives lying usually are prepared to face it. For anyone wondering whether things got better afterward, yeah, they did. Not because everything worked out. Not because I got revenge. Not because I won. They got better because I finally stopped building my life around someone else's lies. And once I did that, I was finally free. End of story. Like, comment, and subscribe.